Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. For people who aren't paying a lot of attention to the news, I'm going to do a recap of this week with Peter Baker, the White House correspondent for the New York Times. Those glasses seem to be very reflective, so I'm going to put these on. Hi, everyone. We are doing an interview with Peter Baker. We're just going to review the last week in the Trump administration and talk about some of the things that have happened, some of the moves he's made, and kind of really just synthesize everything for you all. If you are on a news break or a news blackout, but you just kind of want to know enough about what's going on. I know, Robin, the news is stressful. And I'm sorry about that, you all. But it's also, I think, some of the things that are going on are designed to numb us and feel overwhelmed and not pay attention. So I thought it would be really helpful if I got Peter Baker, who is such a respected White House correspondent for the New York Times, to just talk to us and kind of give us a synopsis of everything that's happened. Peter, gosh, there's so much to talk about, so I want to get to it right away. Did he just sign more executive actions or executive
I
orders?
think he did. I wasn't paying attention today because I was working on something else.
Oh, God. Okay.
There's just so many. I mean, that's his strategy, right? Flood the zone, but it has been effective because it's impossible to keep track of all he's been doing.
Well, can you talk a little bit more of that about the strategy and what the intention is?
Yeah, I think, look, it is a shock and awe strategy. It is hit everybody with so many different orders, so many different decisions, so many different actions that the media, the Democrats, even Republicans, nobody can focus on any single decision for very long and debate it and maybe even generate opposition if it should be opposed because there's just too much going on. It's like a boom, 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 right? It's like a pinball machine. You can't keep track. Now, that doesn't always work well for him. That order he put out earlier this week to freeze federal grants, trillions of dollars worth, backfired, and they blew up and had to retreat on that. But most of these things have been able to go forward without, the kind of sort of sloppiness of the first term. But they're going to be challenged. They've already seen legal challenges, and they knew that. That's something that they anticipated. They wanted to go ahead and get these challenges going right away because they know it'll take time. And they're just hitting on all cylinders right now.
Yeah. Well, let's go through a couple of them because I'm hoping to help people understand what's happening without feeling completely deluged and overwhelmed by what he's doing. It was reported this afternoon that the Trump administration is moving to fire, I don't know if you heard this, FBI agents who worked on January 6th and other Trump-related investigations. Is that come as a surprise to you, Peter?
It really shouldn't be a surprise. He has been very clear. I think a lot of people maybe didn't take him seriously, but it's been very clear throughout the campaign, throughout the post-election period, that he plans to, exact retribution against those people he blames for going after him. This is exactly what he said he would do. I think a lot of people were kind of lulled into thinking, well, maybe that's just bluster. He likes to say a lot of things, but in this case, he's going after the people he blames for what he calls the witch hunt, and in this case, including career civil servants who are just simply doing their jobs.
So you're talking about FBI agents and other people associated with the investigation. Do you have any idea, Peter, how many people we're talking about here?
I don't yet. My colleagues probably have a better sense of it, but there's certainly dozens, I think, on the hook. Remember, there were multiple investigations. Lots of FBI agents and prosecutors were involved in them. The federal government alone lodged 2 different indictments against him, right? One for mishandling classified documents and obstructing the return of those. And of course, the other one, the big one, about trying to overturn the 2020 election illegally. And not only has he short-circuited those investigations or those indictments by getting reelected, he's taking out the people he blames for them. Not just Jack Smith, who was a political appointee. You'd understand that Jack Smith wasn't going to stay. He resigned. But the career people who were working for him, who normally work throughout the government, from government to government, regardless of who's president.
Right. So they stay in their positions because they're career prosecutors, for example. And even if the presidency changes parties, they remain there because ostensibly they're supposed to be independent.
Exactly. Well, they're supposed to be nonpartisan for sure, and they take their policy directions from the political appointees, right? The attorney general and the director of the FBI are appointees of the president. Although even there, the tradition since Watergate was to try to insulate the FBI director from partisan politics by giving him or her a 10-year term so that they wouldn't simply switch with each new president. Well, we've basically now seen that tradition go out the window. Trump not only got rid of his first FBI director last time, he's now gotten rid of this FBI director this time, even though he had previously appointed him.
Since we're on the subject of government personnel, explain for us, Peter, what he did with civil servants who are working for the federal government.
What he's trying to do is, okay, since the late 19th century, when we tried to get rid of the spoils system, right, which was that politicians came in, presidents came in, and everybody was a political ally or not. In the late 19th century, passed laws saying that the civil service had certain protections, that they would be people who would not be subject to the president's partisan loyalties, but to be loyal to the Constitution, loyal to, the United States of America in effect. But what they're trying to do is say, we're going to take the top several tens of thousands of federal employees and try to get rid of their civil service protections so we can make them politically accountable to Donald Trump. On top of that, what they're trying to do is to encourage federal workers across the board to leave their jobs. And they sent out this sort of a buyout kind of offer.
Right.
Elon Musk has orchestrated, in which they say, if you quit by February 6th, you announce that you're going to quit as of February 6th, we'll keep you on the payroll till September 30th, and you can go out and get another job and so forth. So in effect, you would be able to have, several months worth of free salary. And I don't even know that he has the power to do that. Congress is traditionally in charge of this kind of thing. And what he would do to replace them if they all left. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people might take this offer? And then suddenly, what are you going to do? You can't simply hire other people because Congress hasn't authorized that. So it's a really confusing, unprecedented situation here.
So do you know, do you have any way of knowing if people are going to be taking these buyouts? And can he just fire people who are civil servants who have those protections? What kind of legal recourse do they have?
Well, it would be a big fight if he tried to fire entire groups of civil servants without cause. You can fire people in the federal government if you have cause. In other words, you catch them cheating,
right,
not showing up for work, things like that. But traditionally, you're not supposed to fire them because you just don't like them or because you think that they may be a Democrat or Republican or what have you. And that would be fought all the way, I think, to the Supreme Court. So I think that's a tough legal thing. Most presidents have been frustrated at times with the career bureaucrats, and they wish they could have had a chance to fire some of them, but they didn't. They knew it was a legal problem or possibly unconstitutional even, we're not sure. But Trump is willing to take that chance and willing to push that boundary and see if he can't get the courts to go along with him.
All sort of as an effort by Doge. What does that stand for? The Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk is running. Vivek Ramaswamy, I guess, got pushed out. That's another story for another day. But, this is all part of that effort to decrease the number of people in the federal government, right?
Right. And remember, it's important to know this, by the way, this so-called Department of Government Efficiency, this Doge, is not a department. Only Congress can create a government agency or a government department. This is essentially an advisory committee that the president has created on his own, has no official authority under Congress to do the things that Elon Musk is talking about doing. And yet, Elon Musk is acting as if he has basically extraordinary authority. He's acting as almost a quasi prime minister, all while keeping his private businesses, which benefit to the tune of billions of dollars from federal contract. We've never seen, a conflict of interest quite like this. The world's richest man suddenly being given carte blanche to go into the office of personnel management at the federal government and declare what he wants the federal government to do without any authority, without being elected, without even being on the government payroll.
Aren't there any guardrails to prevent that from happening, Peter? It seems insane to me.
It's certainly unprecedented, and we'll see about the guardrails. I imagine there'll be legal challenges over time to that. Somebody who will feel aggrieved will have a standing to sue and then challenge the authority of Elon Musk to make these decisions. But, we'll see. Trump has asserted a very aggressive interpretation of executive power. And he has seated the federal judiciary with a number of his own appointees in this previous term, including 3 on the Supreme Court. And he may be able to find, a court to go along with it.
All right, let me move on to tariffs, because the Trump spokesperson confirmed today that tariffs on goods from this country's three largest trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China, will go into effect on Saturday, tomorrow. I mean, everybody's been talking about this. This was a conversation during the campaign. Isn't that going to raise prices in this country?
In theory, Donald Trump won the election, at least in part, because people were upset at high prices, right? And now what he's doing with these tariffs is risking exactly what you just said, that he's going to raise the price on major consumer goods. These, as you just said, are our three largest trading partners. That means everything that comes from Canada, Mexico, and China will cost that much more because the people who import them are going to pass those costs along to consumers. Maybe not 100% of it, but they'll certainly pass along a lot of it. And so we'll see. We'll see if it actually goes into effect tomorrow, by the way. Let's a little bit of a grain of salt here. He's done this before. He's threatened tariffs and then not actually impose them. Maybe he's still trying to negotiate some sort of a concession on the parts of these countries, and we'll see something happen tomorrow or delay it. But if it does go into effect, you're right. It could have a potentially big impact on American economy.
Okay, let's talk about DEI. I mean, I've never heard a new president use three initials more often than Donald Trump has with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, that has become the new boogeyman and bogeyman, whatever you say, in his administration, and he's blaming it for everything. Before we talk about this tragic plane crash and his weird comment the next day, let's talk about how he's attacking DEI programs and actually getting rid of so many of them. Can you help us understand and just tell us what he's doing in that department?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Look, he has made DEI into a radioactive term, right? Instead of being about bringing people in from different walks of life, which is what it originally was meant to be. Today, especially for conservative Americans and many Americans who might not call themselves conservative, it has become uh, a symbol of excess, liberal excess, that we go too far, that we care more about the color of your skin or your gender identity than we do about whether you can do the job. That's what he's appealing to. And there's certainly, I think, a lot of Americans who feel, torn about kind of programs.
Or that things got out of control or went too far potentially.
Yeah, there are even Democrats who say in some cases that they've gone too far. But what he's done is taken a wide swath of DEI programs and eliminated them entirely. He's not trying to reform them. He's not trying to make sure that they are done carefully or cautiously or appropriately. He's just calling them evil, to use his term, altogether. So the very idea of diversity he is now discrediting and saying we don't value diversity in any form, not just better versions of what was gone wrong, but no diversity whatsoever. So the federal government has been wiped clean, or he's trying to wipe it clean of anything that even smacks of DEI. And he has convinced a lot of the private sector to follow his lead, including companies and corporations and universities and so forth. And it's really having quite an effect.
And Costco said that they were not going to abandon their DEI initiatives, but as you said, a lot of other companies are basically following suit or actually leading the way in some ways, I think, in preparing for President Trump's dislike of these programs. And didn't he do something with saying people couldn't celebrate Women's History Month or, Martin Luther King's Day and all these other things?
Well, there is a memo that came out from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, from the Pentagon saying we're putting a pause on all of these celebrations, including Black History Month, Martin Luther King Day, Women's History Month, Pride Month, all of these different, normal annual celebrations. Now, Caroline Leavitt, the new White House press secretary, was asked about that at her briefing today. She says, no, the president doesn't support that. The president's going to issue a proclamation tomorrow marking Black History Month, and we haven't abandoned that. So it's not clear whether he feels that way or you're seeing preemptive decisions on the part of agencies and departments thinking that they're carrying out what they believe to be his wishes by, even pulling the plug on things like that are simply, celebratory and hardly about policy.
Some of his supporters, I think, well, maybe not, I can't speak for them, but may have thought that he had gone too far when he automatically blamed DEI for the horrific plane crash and the collision with the plane and the helicopter at the Potomac River. And, I grew up in Arlington, Virginia. It just was heartbreaking to see that happen. It had been so long since there had been a crash like that. What did you make of him just off the cuff or just kind of instantaneously blaming DEI? Is there something we don't know? Does he have any evidence that it contributed to this?
Not that he was able to give anybody, no. He just simply said, that's my common sense. And based on nothing that we could tell, we asked him, I wasn't in the briefing room, my colleagues asked him all kinds of questions. What about the helicopter pilot? What about the air traffic controller? What about the elevation? All these different questions. And he couldn't answer any of them, but he simply said, well, it's because President Obama and President Biden favored diversity. And what made that remarkably striking, well, like several things. One is, of course, the tradition for presidents in a moment of tragedy like that is to offer, comfort and to talk about unity and to say, don't jump to conclusions. This is the first president I've ever covered, and I've been covering them since 1996, whoever came out and made an immediate political attack by name on his Democratic predecessors. On top of that, he had no evidence to back it up. And in fact, the one thing he read this list of people with disabilities and said, these are the people the FAA is recruiting, and said that this is somehow Obama and Biden's fault, even though that same policy was in effect during his term in office. And there's no evidence that it had anything to do with yesterday or this week's accident. So we'll see. Maybe something will turn up that will allow them to make the argument that this has something to do with diversity. But it seems to me that this is just his instinct coming into play, where he immediately goes on attack. He immediately goes after what he considers to be his target or his personal enemy. And in this case, his enemies, of course, are Democrats, and the targets are DEI.
I mean, I looked at some comparisons of Ronald Reagan after the Challenger disaster, when, other horrible things have happened, and the role of the commander in chief, and it might have been President Obama at certain moments, like when there's a mass shooting or what happened to Gabby Giffords. And, it is so striking, Peter, what a different tone and tactic Donald Trump is taking, and at a time where it should ostensibly be a time of national mourning and unity, unified in our heartache for these victims of this terrible thing. And yet, I mean, how weird was that for you to watch the way he responded to that, given that you've covered the White House for so many years?
Well, it's startling, obviously, for all the reasons you just said. Reagan after Challenger, George W. Bush after 9/11, George
Right,
W. Bush
of course.
George W. Bush after the plane crash in November of 2001, which wasn't a terrorist attack, but simply another incident like this of a terrible tragedy. They just, presidents don't go immediately to partisan attacks at such moments. It's just not heard of. But this is just not how Donald Trump operates, and we've seen this before. Remember how he handled COVID-19. He never, ever really talked about the human suffering. He went to attacks. He attacked China and the Democratic governors and Obama and the WHO and his own scientific advisors. He never actually had a memorial at the White House for the thousands of people who were dying every day of COVID. It's what his own staff called an empathy gap. It just is not in his nature to be a feel your pain kind of politician like Bill Clinton was or Ronald Reagan was.
Do you think this is going to hurt him among his supporters, or do you think that this is what they've come to expect and appreciate in him?
Well, I think a lot of his supporters probably agree with him that somehow diversity might have been part of it, or at least could have been part of it. And they see him as somebody who is a truth teller, not in the way fact checkers would normally say, because a lot of things he said yesterday were just factually untrue, but a truth teller in the sense that he's willing to say out loud things that other people might think, but don't feel they can say without getting.
But the timing of this seems so grossly inappropriate and insensitive to the families and the people who died.
Well, it's very untraditional to do it this way. 67 people died. They all had families and loved ones and friends.
And in some cases, entire families perished.
Absolutely. And you you mentioned growing up in Arlington. I grew up in Fairfax. I think we were both around in 1982 when Air Florida 90 crashed on the 14th Street Bridge and went into the Potomac River, pretty close to what we're just talking about this week. And I remember that as a young kid in school. That was a searing, scarring moment for the whole area. Everybody felt like this is something very personal to them. And Reagan, of course, as every other president did, spoke to that grief and spoke to the heroism, by the way, of the member Lenny Skutnik who jumped in.
Right, of course, everyone remembers Lenny Skutnik if they were alive then.
Absolutely. And Lenny Skutnik, by the way, was the first person brought to a presidential State of the Union address to be in the box. That was the beginning of the tradition of presidents bringing heroes or other people that they wanted to show off in the gallery for their State of the Union address. So anyway, my point is that you and I remember how important and profound that was in this area. And I think it's going through a lot of people's minds today in the Washington area, how tragic this is. And to hear politics become injected in it feels very out of sync.
Yes, definitely. I wanted to ask you because a lot of people have sent me DMs and messages about Michael Whitaker, Peter. He was the former administrator of the FAA. He'd been a target of Elon Musk because I guess he's fined Elon Musk for some of his programs, and Elon Musk reportedly, maybe you can help me confirm this, wanted him out. So he resigned the day Trump took office. And that same day, the Trump administration froze the hiring of all federal employees, including air traffic controllers, even though the DOT warned in June of 2023 that 77% of air control facilities critical to daily operations of the airline industry were short staffed. So, I guess the question is, and people are trying to make this connection, did some of these personnel moves, having no FAA administrator in place, the staff cuts, freezing the hiring of federal employees in an already strained situation. I guess people are trying to say, or asking the question, did that contribute to what happened on Wednesday night?
Yeah, I think it's worth asking about. First of all, let me just talk about Mike Whitaker, the FAA administrator who quit. We don't have, the good thing is about the Trump and his people is they don't hide their view about these things. Elon Musk said publicly he wanted him to quit. He said last fall in September on his social media platform that he must resign. That's meaning Mike Whitaker, the head of the FAA, because he was upset at the FAA for the reasons you said. The FAA regulates SpaceX, his rocket company, and it fined SpaceX for safety lapses and was delaying one of its rocket launches because it wasn't convinced that it had followed all the proper procedures and so forth. And Musk didn't like that. It sued the FAA and was a outspoken critic of Mike Whitaker. Mike Whitaker understood the landscape, and he quit on the day that Trump took office. He understood he wasn't going to have a job no matter what after that. Now, was that decision just a few days before this plane crash and a hiring freeze just a few days before this plane crash directly, proximately responsible? I think that's a lot to say. It's hard to know that we would have had more aircraft traffic controllers hired in the last week, let's say, who would have been on duty that night. But it is important to know that there does seem to be, as you rightly say, a staffing shortage issue to confront. On the night of this crash, according to our reporting, the air traffic control tower was understaffed, and there was one traffic controller handling the job of two people at one time. Now, again, that probably would have happened whether Trump was president or not, because I think it's too soon to have seen a change in that staffing.
Right.
But it raises the question of whether a hiring freeze at this moment, for the FAA at least, is a wise policy or not, and whether or not staffing shortages going forward are something that this president needs to address.
I was hearing on one cable news outlet that one of the air traffic controllers said that a second one could go home early. Have you seen that as well?
I haven't seen that, and that's something obviously we'll need to follow up as well.
Okay, let me move on, if I could, to the cabinet appointments. Lots of confirmation hearings, maybe again designed for the quote shock and awe and inundating people with too much information. But Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, Robert F. Kennedy, HHS. Anyway, your brilliant wife, Susan Glasser, wrote a piece for The New Yorker this week titled Donald Trump's Cabinet of Revenge, and said this: it seemed clear that these three appointments have more in common than just their concurrent hearings. They have perfectly met the qualification that Trump cares most about: a proven record of tearing down the credibility of the institutions that he has chosen them to lead. What did you make of this week's hearings? And do you think these three people are going to be confirmed?
Yeah, and I think that is a through line for all three of them. They're all deep skeptics or outright critics of the institutions that they're being asked to take over, right? Kash Patel has called the FBI full of swamp monsters and government gangsters. That was the title of his book, Government Gangsters. So his view of the FBI is very negative. He said, in fact, the FBI headquarters should be blown up. Everybody moved out of Washington. They can turn the building into a museum of the deep state, I think he said. obviously we know about RFK Jr.'s skepticism, let's say, or outright opposition to the conventional wisdom about all sorts of medical issues and vaccines. And Tulsi Gabbard has been, a critic of the intelligence community, including, some of the authorities that they use for surveillance. So they all three are coming in with a very hostile view, arguably, toward the government agencies that they would take over. Now, are they going to get through? It looked like from the hearings that Patel had the Republican support he needs probably to get through, which is striking given how much of a partisan he is. We've never seen since Watergate an FBI director who was such a partisan, overt, ideological warrior. Remember, he even wrote a children's book, characterizing Trump as King Donald, who was being taken down by the evil deep state, and Cash the Wizard was there to help him. I mean, this is not your normal resume for a normal FBI director, but he seems to have Republican support anyway.
Right.
Maybe not. Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, he's a doctor, medical doctor, pressed him repeatedly on the link or the lack of link between autism and vaccines, and RFK.
But also, he didn't have a basic working knowledge of Medicaid and Medicare when Dr. Cassidy questioned him.
He said, "Oh yeah, those Medicaid premiums are too high," when in fact Medicaid doesn't have premiums. That's different than Medicare. So he didn't seem to even understand what he'd be taking over. That if Cassidy goes against him, and he's chairman of that health committee, and assuming you also have Mitch McConnell go against him, remember he had polio as a kid, very unhappy, right. RFK Jr. And then the other two, Collins and Murkowski, who voted against Hegseth, you could have theoretically 4 Republicans go against him, and that would be enough to stop him. Gabbard,
would that get him to the full Senate? Because these have been committees, right? And doesn't he have to get voted to go to before the full Senate?
Yeah, the committees, but they can advance a nomination even if the committee doesn't have a majority to recommend them. That's happened before. Move them onto the floor even without the committee recommendation. But you're right, because if Cassidy, who's the chairman of the health committee, were to vote against RFK Jr. in committee, that's a really interesting scenario. That's pretty amazing.
So and what about Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, I know you said that she has a strong dislike for the agency she's being picked to lead, but she also has some pretty sketchy things in her background, and she refused to say Edward Snowden was a traitor. And a lot of people seem to be angry about the way she responded to those questions.
Yeah, I think that Snowden thing is the really striking, event in that hearing, because she was pressed by 4 senators on that, and 4 times Republicans. 4 times she refused to go along with it. So those are Republican senators who are unhappy with her answer. Now, does that mean they vote against her? Maybe not. Remember, this is the Trump era, and loyalty is valued number 1 in the party right now. But it does show you she's still not there yet, and we'll see if she's able to pull together the support.
I'm almost done because I know you got a lot of work to do, but we got a lot of people on social, Peter, asking how closely is President Trump following Project 2025's playbook? Because obviously during the campaign, he tried. Some people were skeptical to distance himself from Project 2025, but a CNN analysis of the 53 executive orders from his first week in office found that more than 2/3, 36 evoked proposals outlined in Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025's 922-page blueprint for the next Republican president.
Yeah, I think he's following it pretty carefully. Remember, he wanted to pretend he had nothing to do with it. I've never heard of these people. And then he hired the very people who helped author it, right? So it's not much of a surprise. These were always his people. This was always a document that was being prepared. Even if he didn't agree with all of it, it was being prepared by the people who were going to surround him and were going to advance these policies, at least with him, if he agreed. And he does obviously agree with many of them, maybe, in fact, the inspiration of a number of them. So I think the Project 2025 thing seems to be a reasonable roadmap to where he has been going so far.
Somebody asked, what do you feel that Trump is doing right? It can't be all bad, can it? Do you have anything that you think he's doing that is worth, I guess, not necessarily celebrating, but praising?
Well, as a reporter, of course, I don't praise or criticize, not for me to decide. I would say that he is showing, I think, this time around, more facility with how to govern than he did last time. Remember last time he came in 8 years ago, he had never spent a single day in public office with the military, the only president in our history who never had, and he didn't know what he was doing. They were really quite sloppy and uncertain and chaotic in those
Disorganized,
ways.
yeah.
Organized. They remember that Muslim country ban, the travel ban that he put in place. They were literally scribbling out things on the executive order by hand with a pen minutes before he signed it because they were still trying to like get it into shape. They didn't know what they were doing. This time around, whether you like what he's doing or not, he's doing it with a great deal more efficiency and discipline than he did last time. That's the only way he can get dozens and dozens of these orders into place. And so just as a matter of effectiveness, he clearly is putting a stamp on government a whole lot more effectively than he did last time. Now, a lot of people are going to be upset about that for the substantive reasons, but just in terms of his ability to do what it is he set out to do and what voters arguably want him to do, he has shown more facility, I think, with how governing works than he did 8 years ago.
He not only wants to overwhelm his opponents, but the Democratic Party as well. Have you witnessed any kind of strengthening of resolve among Democrats or any unification about how to fight back or thwart some of his efforts, and simultaneously any weakening of Republicans who were for quite a long time too afraid for their own political hides to go against him?
Right. But before I get to that, let me just add one more thing to what I just said. Even as he's being more effective in promoting his program, I do want to add, of course, it's important to know that in some ways he is pushing the boundaries of presidential power. He's ignoring laws that are supposed to bind him, and we'll see how that goes. He doesn't, he's reinterpreting the 14th Amendment. He's already been sued, and a judge said that was
Birthright citizenship, yeah.
And then he ignored the law on how to fire inspectors general, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to say that even though he's being more effective, it means it's being entirely legal, because that's still going to be litigated. But in terms of your question on the Democrats, I think the Democrats were pretty demoralized and deflated for an awful long time. But you saw a little bit of life this week for the first time with that executive order freezing $3 trillion, up to $3 trillion worth of federal grants. That's the first time I saw them kind of come to life and begin to object and raise their voice and protest. I think they feel like he overstepped, and it was a moment they could rally around. We'll see if that lasts.
And what about any weakening of Republicans? Do you still feel like they're getting in line at every opportunity?
Well, I mean, one thing we'll know better is once we see those three nominees you just
And
talked
Lisa
about.
Murkowski, by the way, and Pete Hegseth, that was one person, and Mitch McConnell, right?
I think it's so fascinating. It didn't make a difference in the end in terms of Hegseth confirmation, but Mitch McConnell, who spent all those years being the Republican leader and felt obligated, I guess, to stick with his caucus and stick with the president of his party, even when he didn't like it, this time now feels a little liberated. Like, he's just a party of one at this point, and he can say whatever he wants. Now, he's not an open critic in the same way John McCain was. He's not going to be out there leading the cause, but he will stick up against Trump where he feels he can do that. And I think he may do that on a couple of these nominees. More broadly speaking, though, Republicans are pretty loyal, pretty much, stuck's one word, pretty much solid behind Trump at this point, either because they agree with him or because they're afraid of him.
Well, they've launched some pretty intense high pressure campaigns against people like Joni Ernst. If they see someone wavering, they get down to business, and they're pretty serious about threatening a primary challenge or having Elon Musk support a primary challenger with his billions of dollars.
Oh, absolutely. Look, they have made clear, Trump has made clear, you're either behind me or you're out of here. And he is willing to do that. Unlike a lot of presidents who don't, he is willing to do that. And look at Joni Ernst, the senator from Iowa, herself a sexual assault survivor. That was how she made her name in politics to some extent, in the military.
And a combat veteran.
A combat veteran. And she voted for Pete Hegseth despite her own clear doubts after she was, pressured by Trump and his people. So I think he has demonstrated a dominance of that party for the moment. We'll see how long it lasts, but for the moment, he is about as dominant a figure as I think we've ever seen in any political party.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground, and we just didn't even talk about immigration, which we'll do another time. Peter, do you want to give us a preview of what you're working on, or if you tell us, will you have to kill us?
No, I'm working on a story this weekend, assuming these tariffs do go into effect tomorrow, about how Trump he likes to use hard power, not soft power, right? He's willing to bludgeon his way to a result rather than try to negotiate his way to a result. And that may work for him on some level, but there's also a cost to that in terms of our alliances and our friendships with countries that are typically pro-American, but are pretty resentful about what's happening.
Well, a fascinating time in this country, fascinating time to be a White House correspondent, and I use that euphemism loosely. Peter, thank
Thank you,
you.
Katie. It's always great to be with you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. And thanks everyone for watching. Okay, go back to work. Thanks, Peter. Bye.
Take care.